I remember the smell first. This is how memory works for my species, sensory before visual, before language. The smell of that field is stored somewhere so deep in my recall that sometimes, years later, it rises without warning. Wet earth, burning metal, something chemical from the weapons exchange that had been going on since before dawn. And under all of it, the particular smell of a living thing that has lost too much blood. I was a combat medic. I had been a combat medic for 11 years before the war began. I had treated injuries in training accidents, in border skirmishes, in the occasional natural disaster that the Accord's Rapid Response Corps was deployed to manage. I knew what I was doing. I had seen a great deal. I believed, going into the Earth engagement, that I had seen enough to be prepared for most of what I would encounter. I had not accounted for the terrain. Earth's northern continents are covered in many places with a particular kind of landscape: uneven ground, dense vegetation, irregular elevation changes, surfaces that absorb rather than reflect our scanner signals. Our equipment, designed for the open field and orbital engagements where the Accord's doctrine was most comfortable, performed poorly in it. Our medical sensors were slower. Our evacuation routes were harder to calculate. Our situational awareness was reduced from the battlefield-wide clarity I was used to a narrow, immediate, highly personal experience. I was moving through a section of broken ground, following the beacon of a downed unit member when I found him. Not my unit member. The human. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He was in a depression in the ground. Not a deliberate fortification, just a natural hollow where the earth had subsided, creating a space perhaps 2 meters across and half a meter deep. He had clearly been there for some time, long enough that the vegetation around him had been disturbed and resettled, long enough that the blood from his injuries had dried in some places and remained wet in others, which told me his most serious wound was still active. He was conscious. This surprised me. Not the injury. I had assessed human physiological resilience by this point, had reviewed the medical reports our units were filing about the alarming speed of human recovery from trauma. What surprised me was the consciousness specifically. By any calculation, the blood loss alone should have pushed him into the low awareness state that precedes unconsciousness. He should have been drifting. He should have been at the edge of wherever human consciousness goes when the body has been asked for too much. He was watching me. Not the way an injured creature watches a predator, with the dulled, reflexive fear of an animal that has run out of options. He was watching me with attention, with the particular quality of focus that I have since come to think of as the human default state: present, assessing, deciding. His weapon was beside him. His hand was not on it. I stopped. We looked at each other across 2 meters of wet European earth. Behind me, somewhere, the battle was still happening. In front of me, a human soldier with injuries that required immediate attention was watching me with clear eyes and a hand that was not reaching for his weapon. I made a decision. I have thought about that decision many times. I have tried to locate the reasoning behind it, to find the specific logic that made me cross those 2 meters rather than mark the location for human medical teams and continue toward my original objective. I have not found reasoning. I have found only the fact of it, that I crossed the distance, that I knelt beside him, that I opened my medical kit and began to work. Sseth-Vaal, personal record, filed 5 years after the event. He did not speak for the first 4 minutes. I worked and he watched, and neither of us said anything. The sounds around us were the sounds of a battle at middle distance, present, meaningful, not yet immediate. I had perhaps 10 minutes before my location became untenable. I worked quickly. His injuries were significant: 1 deep wound from a projectile, 2 trauma injuries from a nearby explosive event that had thrown him into this hollow in the first place. His body was doing what human bodies apparently do, which is to continue functioning at a level that my medical training told me was improbable. I stabilized what I could. I administered what was compatible with human biochemistry from my kit. I had been issued a cross-species supplement pack for exactly this eventuality, which told me the Accord had anticipated this situation, even if no one had told me clearly what to do when it arrived. At the 4-minute mark he spoke. He said in English, which my translation unit processed with the 2-second delay that indicated a language it had learned recently. "You don't have to do this." I said, "I know." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "Why are you I did not have an answer. I told him this. I said, I don't have a sufficient explanation. You were injured. I have the means to help. I helped. He looked at me with an expression I could not read. I know now what it was. I did not know then. Then I simply filed it as unclassified and continued working. At the 6-minute mark, I had done what I could do. His life was no longer in immediate danger. His situation was still serious. He needed further treatment that I could not provide in this location with this equipment. He needed to be evacuated by his own people. I told him this. He said, I know. My unit knows where I am. They'll come. How long? Hour, maybe less. I looked at him. He could survive an hour. He would be in significant pain for that hour, but he would survive it. I began to close my kit. He said, wait. I stopped. What's your name? He asked. The question was so unexpected that I did not answer for a moment. In the middle of this, in the middle of a battle, 5 years into a war, in a hollow in the ground in a continent far from either of our homes, he was asking my name. Sseth-Vaal, I said. He repeated it carefully. He got it approximately correct, which for a human speaking an Accord name is considered good. Daniel Okafor, he said. Sergeant, 3rd Battalion. I said, I know you don't need to tell me that. I know, he said. I wanted to. I closed my kit. I stood. I looked at him one more time. Your unit will come, I said. Yeah, he said, then Sseth-Vaal. I stopped. Thank you. 2 words in English. My translation unit gave them to me with complete confidence and zero ambiguity. Thank you. The human expression of gratitude, uncomplicated, direct, offered across a war from a man I had just kept alive to the soldier of the force trying to end his civilization. I walked back into the battle. I did not look back. I have thought about that choice, not looking back, more than almost any other choice I made in the war. Not because it was wrong. I don't think it was wrong. But because I have always wondered what his face looked like in that moment, and I never found out. For 5 years I did not find out. Now 5 years after, Geneva, Earth, the first Accord Earth Joint Peace Summit. Geneva is a city of careful architecture and cold water, and a particular kind of quiet that comes from being, for a very long time, the place where people come to stop fighting. I arrived 3 days before the summit. I had been assigned as part of the Accord medical delegation, a group of physicians and researchers presenting joint findings on cross-species medicine, which had developed significantly since the war ended, partly because the war had provided, as wars always do, a brutal quantity of data. It was not the posting I would have chosen, but it was the one I had been given, and I have spent enough years in service to understand that where you are sent is rarely where you would have chosen. The summit was large. 1,700 delegates, support staff, observers, and journalists occupying every hotel and conference facility in the city. Security that I, as a former military medical officer, could recognize and respect. The particular organized chaos of an event that multiple governments and the Accord's diplomatic corps had been planning for 2 years, and were now executing with the combined tension of everyone involved knowing how much was riding on it going well. I presented my research on the 2nd day. It was received politely. I answered questions. I had lunch with 3 colleagues in a restaurant overlooking the lake, and I watched the water, which was a particular gray-green that I had not seen before and found unexpectedly calming. I was not thinking about Daniel Okafor. I want to be precise about this because it matters for what happened next. I was not looking for him. I was not thinking about him. He was in my memory, a specific, clear memory, the kind that the sensory storage makes vivid, but I had not spent 5 years searching. I had done what soldiers do with the memories that don't fit anywhere, filed them, kept them, not discarded, not dwelt upon. I was walking along the lakefront on the 3rd morning, before the day's sessions began, when I saw him. I knew him immediately, not from a face I had studied or a file I had reviewed, from something more immediate, The way he moved, careful, economical, the particular gait of someone who has been injured and has recovered fully but whose body retains the memory of being careful. He was in civilian clothes. He was carrying a coffee cup. He was walking in the same direction I was walking, 20 meters ahead of me, apparently looking at the lake. I stopped walking. The sensory memory arrived before the thought. Wet earth and burning metal and the smell of blood, and 2 meters of European soil, and a man watching me with clear eyes. I stood there for a moment, on the lakefront in Geneva, with the gray-green water and the cold morning air and 1,700 delegates somewhere behind me, all trying to build something new from what the war had left. I thought I could keep walking. He has not seen me. I could pass by or turn back and it would be the same as not looking back in that hollow in the ground. Clean, uncomplicated, a thing that happened and was over. I thought, I have wondered for 5 years what his face looked like. I walked toward him. I don't know what I expected. Not the reality of it, I think, the specific ordinary awkwardness of approaching a stranger who is not a stranger, of finding the words for something there is no protocol for. I stopped beside him. He was looking at the water. He had not heard me approach. I am quiet when I move, a habit of 11 years of medical work in crisis environments. I said, "Daniel Okafor." He turned. He looked at me, and I watched the moment of recognition, watched it move across his face, and it was not the expression I had expected and could not have predicted. Not fear, not the hard-edged wartime recognition of an enemy, something slower and more complicated, and I had to search for the words softer. He said, Sseth-Vaal. He pronounced it exactly right. 5 years later, he pronounced it exactly right. I had nothing prepared. I had not been looking for him, and so I had not prepared for finding him. And now I was standing beside the lake in Geneva, having been recognized immediately and called by my name exactly correctly, and I had nothing to say. He said, "I didn't know if I'd ever," he stopped, started again. "I looked for you." For me. After the war, when the records were being declassified, I submitted a request through the Joint Information Office. I wanted to, he paused. He was holding his coffee cup with both hands and looking at me with an expression I was working very hard to read. I wanted to find you. I didn't know if I would. And here you are. Here I was. Why did you look for me? I asked. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Because I've been carrying your name for 5 years and I needed somewhere to put it." Part 3: The Carrying. We walked along the lake for a long time without saying much. This is something I have since learned about Daniel Okafor. He is comfortable with silence in a way that is unusual even among humans, who have a wider tolerance for it than most accord species. He does not fill quiet with words. He allows it to exist. He moves through it the same way he moves through everything, carefully, with attention, as though he is listening to something the rest of us cannot hear. After perhaps 20 minutes, he said, "How did you end up here, at the summit?" I explained. "Medical delegation, cross-species research," he nodded. "I'm here with the Veterans Advisory Committee," he said. "We were asked to present perspectives from the people who were actually in it, on the ground." A pause. "They wanted the summit to include that, not just the generals and the diplomats, the people who were in the fields." "Do you speak today?" "Tomorrow." He looked at the water. "I've been trying to work out what to say, what's useful, what actually means something for what they're trying to build." "What are they trying to build?" "A framework," he said, "for not doing it again." He said it simply, without bitterness, without the weight that some humans carry when they talk about the war, just the fact of it. A thing that happened, a thing that should not happen again, a project ongoing. "Is that possible?" I asked. I meant it honestly. It is a question I have returned to many times in 5 years of post-war medical work, whether it is possible to build structures solid enough to hold against the next thing that seems, in the moment, like it requires war. He thought about this for a moment. "I don't know," he said, But the alternative to trying is not trying, and I've seen where not trying leads. He glanced at me. You've seen it too. Yes, I said. Then we try. It was not a complicated answer. It was not a fully satisfying one. But it was, I thought, an honest one. And in my experience, honesty, even when it is incomplete, is more useful than the comfortable answer. We found a bench near the water. We sat. The morning was moving toward midday, and the summit sessions would begin soon. But for a little while longer there was the lake and the cold air and 5 years of unspoken things that were beginning, slowly, to find their way into words. He said, "Can I ask you something?" Yes. In the field that day, he was looking at the water. You were a combat medic, you were in a battle, you were looking for one of your own people, and you stopped for me. He paused. Why, not the answer you gave me then. You said you didn't have an explanation, but 5 years later, do you have one now? I considered this seriously. I had thought about it many times. I had over 5 years arrived at something that was not quite an explanation but was as close as I had managed. I think, I said slowly, that there is a training we receive and a training we give ourselves. The official training tells you what to do and who to do it for and what falls outside your responsibility. I had that training. It was clear. You were outside my responsibility. But I had also spent 11 years doing this work. 11 years of moving toward injured things and doing what could be done. And in 11 years that impulse, the one that moves you toward rather than past, becomes its own training, its own instruction. By the time I reached that field, it was not a choice I made consciously. It was closer to a reflex. I paused. I crossed the distance and I was already kneeling before I had decided to do it. He was quiet for a moment. A reflex of mercy, he said. I had not used those words, but they were the right words. Yes, I said, I suppose that is what it was. He nodded slowly, looked at the water. I've thought about that a lot, about what it takes to build that into yourself, to make it automatic. He paused. My mother is a nurse. She's been a nurse for 30 years. She says the same thing, that at some point you stop deciding to help and it just is. It's just what you do. She is describing the same reflex. She'd probably say she was describing who she decided to be when she was 22 and has been ever since. He smiled, briefly. She's more decisive about it than you are. I found that I was, without entirely intending to. Making the small exhale sound that I had learned was the accord equivalent of a quiet laugh. She sounds formidable, I said. She absolutely is, he said. Then, after a moment, she wants to meet you. I looked at him. I told her about you, he said. After the war, after I came home, she wanted to know everything, what happened, who was there, what the field was like. And I told her about you. He paused. She said to find you and say thank you from her as well. The lake was very still. Somewhere behind us, the city was moving through its morning, full of delegates and history, and the specific organized hope of people trying to do something important. I did not say anything for a long time. You carried that, I said finally. What happened in that field? You carried it home and told your mother, and she is here in this conversation 5 years later. Yes, he said. I did not know, I said, that it went forward like that it kept going. He looked at me. Did you think it ended when you walked away? I didn't think about it that way. Things don't end when you walk away from them, he said. They just continue without you watching. He paused. You were there. You were part of it. It went forward with your name in it whether you knew or not. I sat with this. I thought about the 11 minutes I had spent in that hollow, about the calculations, blood loss and wound severity and available resources, and time remaining before the position became untenable. About the moment I stood up to leave and he said, wait. About his name. I carried your name too, I said. I should tell you that. I said I was not looking for you, and that is true, but I carried your name. It has been in my recall very clearly for 5 years. He looked at me with an expression I had learned to read in the time we had been talking. I had been filing his expressions as we went, building a key the way I always do, systematically, from data, building toward understanding. This expression was moved, the human word for when something reaches them somewhere they were not defending. "I'm glad," he said quietly. Part 4. What is owed? Sseth-Vaal, personal record, written the night after meeting Daniel Okafor. I need to write this down before the clarity of it fades, before the ordinary days of the summit layer over it, and it becomes a memory among memories rather than the thing it is right now, which is a thought I have been moving toward for 5 years without knowing it. He asked me, over coffee by the lake, whether I had struggled after the war. Not a diplomatic question, a direct one in the way he does everything, without preamble, without softening, but also without aggression. Simply honest. I told him yes. I told him that military medical work in a major conflict leaves marks that do not disappear when the conflict ends. That I had spent 2 years after the war in what the Accord's medical system calls integrative recovery, which is the formal language for the process of rebuilding yourself after an experience that has changed your understanding of what you are capable of, both the things you are proud of and the things you are not. He said, "Me too." 2 words, the same weight as thank you in that field 5 years ago, simple, direct, shared. What helped? I asked him, not as a medical professional gathering data, as one person asking another. He thought for a while. Talking, he said, talking to people who were there. Talking to people who weren't. Finding out that both kinds of conversation were useful for different things. He paused. My mother, my sister, some of the people I served with, a counselor for about a year. Running, I run every morning. I've run every morning since the war. I think my body needs to do something physical before it's willing to let the day be calm. He looked at me. And carrying the things that were worth carrying, the field in Europe, that was worth carrying. Not because it was, not because it made the rest of it make sense. Nothing makes it all make sense. But because it was real, because it happened. Because you crossed 2 meters in the middle of a battle when you had no reason to, and it meant that I got to come home. I did not respond immediately. There are moments when the correct response is not words. After a while I said, I have sometimes wondered whether it was enough, what I did in that field, whether the 11 minutes and the supplies I had, whether it was sufficient medically, whether you were actually safe until your unit arrived. I was, he said, they told me later, what you did stabilized the bleeding, neutralized the infection risk. I was in pain, but I was stable. I wasn't, he paused. I wasn't going anywhere. I am glad, I said. It was not a sufficient thing to say. It was what I had. Sseth-Vaal, he said. I looked at him. Thank you again for then, and for being here, for walking toward me this morning instead of past. I thought about walking past, I said honestly. I know, he said, thank you for not. From a letter Daniel Okafor sent to his mother that evening, shared with permission. Mama, I found him. I know I told you I had submitted the request through the Joint Information Office and I wasn't sure anything would come of it, but I found him. Or he found me, I'm not entirely sure which. We walked along the lake for 3 hours. He is quiet in the same way you are quiet, the kind of quiet that is not absence but presence. He listens the way you listen, like he is taking something seriously. I told him you wanted to say thank you. He did the thing where he went very still, the way he does when something reaches him, and I could tell it mattered. We have agreed to have dinner tonight, the last evening of the summit. I don't know what comes after that. I know that I have been carrying his name for 5 years, and today I gave it back to him and he gave mine back to me, and I feel, I don't have the exact word. Lighter is not right. More complete, maybe. Like something was open and is now closed, not because it doesn't matter anymore, but because it found its ending. I love you. I will call when I'm back. Part 5. Dinner. The restaurant was quiet and small and served food from several different Earth traditions on the same menu, which I have come to understand is not unusual in Swiss cities. We ordered things and talked about them, which I have learned to do, the human practice of discussing food as a form of conversation, which I was taught about formally by Envoy Calethren's reports and have since practiced with some success. Daniel ordered something called rosti, which he explained was a local preparation, and explained it with the fondness humans extend to food that carries memory. He had eaten it in Geneva once before, years ago, before the war. He said it tasted the same. He said he was glad it tasted the same. I asked him what he had been doing in the 5 years since the war. He had gone back to school. He had been studying engineering before the war interrupted and he had finished. He worked now with a non-governmental organization building infrastructure in communities damaged by the conflict. Not just Earth communities. Accord-adjacent worlds where the disruption of supply lines had caused secondary damage that the peace treaty had not fully addressed. He described this work without drama, as something that needed doing and that he was able to do. The same way he had said, "Then we try by the lake," simply as fact. "Do you work with Accord people?" I asked. "More and more," he said. "The cross-species engineering projects are expanding. Last month I was on a site with 4 Accord engineers and a team from the Thren Collective. We were rebuilding a water treatment facility on a world I'd never heard of before the war started." He smiled. It was a small smile, private, the kind that comes from remembering something good. "It was the best month of work I've had. Not because it went perfectly, it didn't. Lots of things went wrong. But we figured them out together, and the water worked at the end." "The water worked at the end," I repeated. "That's the whole thing," he said. "That's the whole point. You build something and at the end it works." I thought about that, about the difference between building something and fighting about something, about the specific satisfaction he was describing, the satisfaction of a thing that functions, water moving through pipes it did not move through before, a system working, a problem resolved. "I think," I said carefully, "that you are describing the same impulse, the one that crossed 2 meters in a field in Europe, the reflex of moving toward rather than past." He looked at me. "Except now," I continued, "it is directed at infrastructure." He laughed properly, the full human laugh, the broken engine sound, warmer than any weapon. Sseth-Vaal, you say things sometimes that." He shook his head, still laughing. "Yes, you're exactly right, it's the same thing, I just found a different application. A more constructive one." "Considerably." He was still smiling. "What about you after the war? What did you build?" I thought about this. "I am still building it," I said. "I am developing the cross-species medical protocols, the framework for treating injuries across different biologies. It is slow work. There is much that we do not know, much that requires study and error and revision, but at the end of it there will be something that did not exist before, a body of knowledge, a set of practices." I paused. "The water will work." He raised his glass. A human gesture, I knew it, I had been cataloging them. A toast, marking something. "To the water working," he said. I raised mine. "To the water working," I said. Epilogue: what stays? The summit ended the following day. Daniel Okafor presented his remarks to the plenary session in the morning. I was in the audience. He spoke for 20 minutes without notes. He spoke about a hollow in the ground in northern Europe and an 11-minute medical treatment and a name he had carried for 5 years. He did not describe it as a story of mercy or redemption or any of the large words that humans and the Accord's diplomats had been using all week. He described it as a story about a reflex. "There is training," he said, standing at the podium in his quiet, careful way, "and there is the training underneath the training. The thing you build into yourself so deep it becomes automatic. I have been asked to speak about what prevents the next war. I don't know how to answer that at the scale of governments and treaties and historical forces, but I know how to answer it at the scale of one person. You practice the reflex. You practice it in the small moments, in the things you choose to do when you don't have to, when it costs you something, when the easier thing is to walk past. You practice it until it becomes who you are. And then, when the large moment comes, and it will come, you already know what to do. He did not look at me during this. He did not need to. The room was full. After the session, I found him in the corridor. We stood together for a moment. "The water worked," I said. He understood. "Yes," he said, "it did." We exchanged contact information. A practical human thing, coordinates and frequencies, and the specific channel designations that allow two people in different parts of the galaxy to stay in each other's reach. Unglamorous. Necessary. He said, "My mother will want your contact too. I'm telling you now so you're prepared." "I am prepared," I said. "You're really not," he said, "but you'll be fine." I walked to the transit hub. The summit behind me, the city doing what cities do, the lake I had not looked at enough still there between the mountains. I thought about the things we carry, the names, the 11 minutes, the smells that arrive without warning years later and bring it all back, the wet earth and the burning metal and the sound of a battle at middle distance, and a man watching me with clear eyes and a hand not reaching for his weapon. I thought about how things do not end when you walk away, how they continue without you watching, how your name travels forward in someone else's story, doing work you don't know about, reaching places you have never been. I thought about Daniel Okafor at a construction site on a world he had never heard of before the war, rebuilding a water treatment facility with 4 Accord engineers, water moving through pipes it had not moved through before. I thought the reflex goes forward too. You practice it until it becomes who you are, and then it keeps going. Through you, through the people you cross 2 meters for, through their mothers and their letters and the stories they tell at peace summits, through the engineers on the construction site, through the water. It keeps going.